nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors these broadcasts. Today we're broadcasting from Ottawa, Canada, where as chairman of the Coalition to Block the North American Union, I've been doing a series of news conferences and media interviews to express the concern which so many Americans share about the impending plans for a North American Union and the existing activities of the Security and Prosperity Partnership, which has 20 working groups of bureaucrats and technocrats without congressional approval moving to harmonize the rules and regulations which govern much of the official business of Canada, the United States, and Mexico. But we are not alone, and I'm privileged to have as my guest today on Conservative Roundtable a distinguished Canadian leader from a historically significant Canadian family who is the head of the Canadian Action Party and who shares many of the concerns of the Conservative Caucus and the Coalition to Block the North American Union. And her name is Mrs. Connie Fogel. Connie, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me with you.
You've got quite a background. You have a law degree, a
Yes.
master's degree. Your grandparents were pioneers in
Yes.
Saskatchewan. Your husband, who died some years ago, was a very popular political leader.
That's right.
In Western Canada, and you came to fill his shoes to a very great degree.
Well,
how did all that happen?
I don't know. I guess I've always been very politically interested and involved in my entire life, and it just I've been participating in various levels of politics forever, it seems, and I just life just propels you along. It seems you seem to be. Things just happen, and there you are. It's hard to plan. You don't plan it. And as a matter of fact, if I had my druthers, I would much rather at this time in my life be running around the world, sightseeing, having lots of fun, and just relax and enjoying my garden. But the circumstances of our times propel me to continue to work politically and be very active, precisely because I couldn't stand. I couldn't be comfortable knowing what's going on. I wish I didn't know as much as I do know about what's happening to our countries.
Tell me a little bit about your family history and about your husband's political role while he was living.
Oh, well, my husband was very active his entire life, and he spent 25 years on City Council of Vancouver. He was the most popular alderman for all those years, and he appealed to people across the political spectrum simply because he was able to go to the core of issues. He could hit the nail right on the head. He would be able to express what people felt, and that people would, you'd know there's something wrong, you'd have a feeling about something, but unable to properly just express your thoughts and your feeling, and he would do it just like that. And it was something very appealing to people. He had a good touch. Everybody respected him and trusted him. They went to him en masse, individually, even for personal things, and he helped people individually as much as he could.
Tell me about the Canadian Action Party. What is its history, and what are its most important policy positions?
Well, the Canadian Action Party was founded in 1997 by Paul Hellyer, who was a former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada. He had served in both Liberal governments and Conservative governments in Canada. And the reason for his change was always that something wasn't quite right. There wasn't enough. He was particularly concerned with the failure to really address the monetary issue and to really deal with the power and the sovereignty that lies in money. And there's a great movement around the world recognizing that he who controls the purse strings, well, we always know this anyway, but anyone who's in control basically of how your money operates in your nation controls the nation, and it doesn't matter who's in government, which which party it is.
They very often decide who is in government.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so that's been a major plank of our party, monetary reform. And we're very lucky in Canada. We have a central bank called the Bank of Canada that our government doesn't use anymore except for about 3%. And if we did, it'd be a whole different picture. Some of our best programs in Canada came from times when the Bank of Canada was used fairly substantially. But the other major plank of our party's platform has to do with sovereignty and independence, nationalism. We've always been extremely concerned about the growing loss of Canadian sovereignty, which really escalated with NAFTA, the sell-off of our corporations, of our industries being taken over from other countries. And it's really worrisome in this time when corporations are ruling the world, and now we have next to no corporations that are Canadian that are left here anymore. It's getting to be, that's been the primary takeover of our country. And as we're talking these days, is the recognition of the power that's transferred over to the rule of unelected, unaccountable, unrepresentative forces that completely are overpowering our leaders that are elected. The whole move into administrative official rule is a bad thing, a very bad thing, because in a democracy, everything should flow from the people. Our countries were founded with a recognition that responsibility lying in the heart and the hand of the people is sacrosanct, very precious. Wars have been fought, people have died, people have suffered to obtain and to protect and preserve that, and we're losing that now, and that's a very worrisome thing.
In 1993, when NAFTA was being debated, I was helping lead the fight against it in the United States, and I was a guest at a wedding in Canada, in Toronto, and I recall the fury of my Canadian friends at NAFTA. They were completely opposed to it. They didn't understand why it was being pushed or what its impact would be. I know you were active in opposing it. What has been the impact of NAFTA in Canada?
Oh, well, jobs. There was always this talk about jobs, but in fact, it's not working out the way the papers present it. We're losing, head offices are moving someplace else. They're moving to places more and more of operation. It's the same story everywhere. Operation where the labor is the cheapest. There's a brain drain as a result of it.
Whether it's slave labor from Red China or cheap labor from Mexico.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then the biggest thing, of course, is if you lose the foundation of your corporate structure in your nation, I mean, that is a core part of it. We're not opposed to corporations existing. We're opposed to corporations ruling everything and taking the power away from the people. You need industry, obviously.
As we're taping this discussion, President George Bush of the United States, your Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and Felipe Calderon are behind closed doors at a meeting at the beautiful Montebello Resort in Montebello, Canada. And there are no elected legislators from any of the three countries invited to take part. There are no elected members other than the presidents. There are no duly appointed judges, but there are a great many corporate heads.
That's right.
And if you look at the Bush administration's policies, one must ask, why did Bush favor amnesty in his immigration bill? One of the reasons was to get cheap labor from Mexico to serve the big corporations. Why, until the defeat of the amnesty bill, was Bush unwilling to enforce the 1986 U.S. law which penalized corporations for hiring illegal aliens? Why has Bush been so reluctant to build a fence, as Congress required him to do, but which he has not done? And it all goes back to the idea of an ultimate North American Union where there would be no borders and where the northern perimeter of Canada, the southern perimeter of Mexico, would become the new border of the United States, of Canada, of Mexico. And if they're serious about fighting terrorism, I'd worry about people from Guatemala getting into Mexico and then traveling at will throughout the United States. It's a great deal similar, very much similar to the European Union, where if you are a resident of any one of the 27 EU countries, you can travel at will without documents to any of the other 26 or 27 European Union countries. And what they have in mind is subordinating the distinct histories, cultures, beliefs of the three countries to a new North American regime. The architect of the North American Union, which he says is a North American community, is Robert Pastor, who was in the administration of American President Jimmy Carter. And Pastor says he favors a customs union. He has talked about having superstructures overseeing the judiciaries, the parliaments, legislative bodies, and even the executive branches of the three governments. And he talks about our young people learning North American history. Well, that concerns me. I want Americans to learn American history, Canadians to learn Canadian history, and Mexicans to learn Mexican history. I think North American history, if written by Mexicans, and they were talking about the Battle of the Alamo, would be quite different from what Americans would suppose.
Well, of course, and that's very interesting because you can see the agenda essentially is to eliminate, it's just to erase what we are. And it's not a threat, as you and I know. I mean, this is something that is in process. And the unacceptable, most offensive aspect, of course, is this expectation and intention to have this administrative body. These people come from the corporate elite who are making the decisions in all the significant areas, from our judicial areas through our immigration, through defense, through foreign affairs, through trade. And so elected people,
bureaucrats, technocrats, and corporate elitists. Connie, we have to take a brief break. My guest for this edition of Conservative Roundtable is Canadian political leader, Mrs. Connie Fogel. And I hope you'll stay with us following these brief messages. Since the presidency of George H.W. Bush, the father of the incumbent, we've heard a great deal of talk about something called the New World Order. This is something of which every American should be wary, because what it means is the transfer of control over our tax dollars and the setting of policies which affect us from an electorally accountable Congress to international bureaucracies over which we have no real control. Work with the Conservative Caucus in defeating the goals of the New World Order and restoring accountable, limited constitutional government in America.
The Conservative Caucus, www.conservativeusa.org or 703-938-9626.
Here's how you can become a citizen lobbyist and influence how your representatives vote. Write a letter to your congressmen and senators. Speak out on a call-in talk radio program. Write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper and call the Conservative Caucus for more information at 703-938-9626.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, and our very special guest is Mrs. Connie Fogel, the leader of the Canadian Action Party. We're broadcasting from Ottawa, Canada, about an hour-and-a-half drive from Montebello, where President Bush, Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper, Mexican President Felipe Calderon have been meeting under the auspices of something called the Security and Prosperity Partnership. What are your main concerns about SPP?
Oh, it's the end of our countries as we've known them, and everybody, citizens, must do all within their power to fight against this. There's just no question.
We have won a couple of victories recently. At the last moment, the Bush administration slipped into their amnesty bill language authorizing the SPP. When the immigration bill, the amnesty bill, went down, so did that. And then two members of our Congress in the House, one Democrat, Marcy Kaptur of Ohio, one Republican, Duncan Hunter of California, introduced legislation saying not one penny under this appropriation shall be used to fund the SPP. It got more than 300 votes, something like 60 or 70 in opposition. Great victory for us. And we have a couple of dozen plus co-sponsors of House Concurrent Resolution 40, which explicitly opposes the NAFTA superhighways, SPP, NAU. What is happening in the Canadian Parliament?
Nothing. To our shame. We're worse off. People are worse off in Canada than the people are in the United States in the sense of the absence of leadership at the political level.
Do you have talk radio to buttress your efforts?
Oh, we do. We have talk, and the alternative media is good in Canada. But we don't have as much as you have in the United States. And it's quite a disgrace as well that this little voice from the Canadian Action Party
very eloquent voice.
Is getting exposure in Canada via U.S. Alternative media more than any of our local exposure. We don't have as much alternative media. Well, mind you, we're 30 million, you're 300 million. We can expect you to have more alternative media. But the reality is at our political level, those who are actually in government, at no level, neither at the federal, nor the provincial, nor the municipal level, has there been any voice of unified statement saying, we don't want this new arrangement. We don't want this restructuring, let alone whether or not it's going to be named the North American Union, which is the way they dismiss us all the time, saying there's no North American Union being planned. No, they're not going to give us a new country as such with democracy, with democratic mechanisms. They don't want that at all. So that's what they mean when they say there's no North American Union. We know that there's a North American entity that they're already creating. So as far as our political leaders in Canada are concerned, they just say it's not happening. I've had information from our supporters across the country who go to their MPs. Some of their members of Parliament have actually kicked them out of their offices saying, get out of here, you're just a conspiracy nut, go get a job. This isn't happening, don't waste my time. Now this is, and others who do know something, rather than picking up on it and working with those people and trying to get the community really informed, they say to them, well, there's nothing I can do, but you just keep talking about it. It's bizarre.
Now, Stephen Harper has a minority government in the Canadian Parliament. When do you think he will call an election?
Well, right now, in this past year, our Parliament changed the rule about elections so that they're mandatory every 4 years now. One of the ways we're becoming integrated. So that we're in more uniform
with the U.S.
with the practices of the U.S. However, because we're a minority government can always be brought down if there's enough of an opposition just says we have no confidence in you. The reality is this government is supported right now by the Bloc Québécois, which is very interesting because that's a party which has as its goal to get out of Canada.
Right.
So we've got a party in power that wants to get out of Canada by creating a North American entity, and a major opposition that's supporting them that wants to get out of Canada. So we're in a bizarre, it's a very unhealthy state in Canada. The other two parties, the Liberal and the NDP, are doing nothing, speaking out not at all in this. Mind you, the Liberals were in power when the Security and Prosperity Partnership was signed.
He is at the Montebello meeting, not as a politician, but as a business leader.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Paul Martin is.
Yes, he is.
That's right. And you see, for all those Canadians who what often happens for us, people will say, we don't want the Conservatives, we want the Liberals. So they'll gang up on the Conservatives in order to get the Liberals in when the Liberals were the ones doing this to us.
Now, given the new 4-year rule, what is the last time in which an election can be held?
It would be 2009.
So you're still a good distance from that, unless he loses a vote of confidence.
Now there should be. There's this issue is what the opposition parties should be using and forcing an election. Now we have some of them. The NDP are now finally, lamely coming forward with some very weak motions. They've got one they say is coming before Parliament in the fall. They think it's a great thing they're doing. It's at least a something, but all they're asking for is more openness, more disclosure, more participation by the citizens. And I mean, my position is no, we don't want to talk about how we're going to die.
Sure. You know, there's an old story in the United States, Connie, maybe in Canada as well, that if you put a frog in a pot of cold water,
Yes, yes.
and you raise the temperature a degree at a time, he's finally cooked without being aware of what's happening. That's what happened in Europe. Recently, they celebrated the supposed 50-year anniversary of the European Union, but 50 years ago there was no European Union. There was an iron and coal community, and then bit by bit by bit they added on to it. I went to Europe in the period when Maastricht was being debated. I went to 8 of the countries that were debating it. And in Luxembourg, the foreign minister of that country, unaware of our views, told my group, dear friends, if the people of Luxembourg had any idea what we were doing, they would rise up in anger and outrage. And that's what's happening here. It's stealth. It's incremental. And now they wake up. They've got a European Union. Former president of Germany says that 74% of the laws that used to be made at the provincial and national level are now being made in Brussels by the bureaucrats.
By the bureaucrats.
And already they're doing that with SPP.
Absolutely.
They have what they call harmonization of rules and regulations.
That's right,
Now, can you make this a referendum question in the next Canadian election?
The government would have to decide that it's going to be a referendum question, and we have a government that doesn't that favors this.
I mean, without a referendum, can you force the candidates of the major parties in Canada, the Liberals, the Conservatives, even the NDP, can you force them to defend their action or lack thereof on this issue?
Only by no formal way. Only by the vote, by an informed citizenry.
Will you be able to run candidates across Canada?
Oh yes, if we have enough money. It's always a question of money. We're a small party, and it's interesting in Canada. You see, the rules were changed a couple of years ago about financing. Very interesting what they did to us. It used to be the case that small parties survived by large benefactors. Big parties survived by large benefactors as well, usually the banks and the large corporations. So a rule was brought in that no corporation could give more than $1,000, no labor union more than $1,000 per year, no citizen more than $5,000 per year. Last year they changed it so that nobody can give more than $1,000 and corporations can't even give the money. However, what they said to make up for this difference, we will fund the parties by giving you $1.75 for every vote that you get. However, your party must get 2% of the vote in order to get the $1.75. So what they did to the small voices, who are the only ones that are the real opposition, is just tighten the screws completely.
That's somewhat similar to McCain-Feingold in the U.S. Connie, we have to take another break, and when we come back, we're going to give Connie the last word and tell our American audience what her predictions will be about the future of support or opposition to SPP and NAU in Canada, and how we can work together on this, because after all, we're friends. We just don't want to destroy our separate sovereignties. Canada is as good a friend as America has in the world. We want to work together with our Canadian friends. We don't want them to lose their national independence, nor do we wish to lose ours. Stay with us. I'm Howard Phillips. We'll be back with Mrs. Connie Fogel.
Here's how you can become a citizen lobbyist and influence how your representatives vote. Write a letter to your congressmen and senators. Speak out on a call-in talk radio program. Write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper, and call the Conservative Caucus for more information at 703-938-9626.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, Chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors Conservative Roundtable. If you're interested in the kinds of issues we discussed, please check out our website, www.conservativeusa.org. On your screen is information about how to contact Mrs. Connie Fogel. Connie, it's all yours.
Well, thank you very much. I want to end just by reminding people that what's under attack here is not just the loss of our two nations. What's under attack is our sovereignty. And it's not just our sovereignty as nations, it's sovereignty of us as individuals. Sovereignty is a precious, precious concept. It's connected to liberty, freedom, all concepts that sometimes are bandied around a little too freely, but when you really pay attention to them, you understand that the preciousness of those concepts. For us to live as human beings in ways that allow us to use our capacity to make our own decisions and have some say over how our lives are ruled, how our children are going to grow, how we're going to live our lives generally, where we're going to work, how we're going to work, whether we're going to be happy, whether we're going to suffer. Now, what's most important is to understand that the agenda that's in place here is not just the destruction of two nations, but the destruction of the functioning of the individual, moving us back to a form of serf, a servant for the corporate elite. We're only going to be allowed to exist so far as we serve that larger greed. And when we get in the way, our protections are to be eliminated. That's part of the end of all the controls over, say, pharmaceuticals, for instance, which have a mechanism and an importance for protecting the health of individuals. What's important to really understand as we learn the process that's at stake is that the future doesn't have to be a bad one. We just have to realize the power that lies within ourselves. We come into this world born with a certain inalienable right to be human, and to be human means the entitlement to live in this nature and use the resources of this nature for our betterment as human beings. What's important to realize is that is so precious, but we don't get it for nothing. We have to work for that. Just as our liberty doesn't come from nothing. We have to work for it, we have to protect it, we have to stand up for it, we have to defend it. And that means you don't sit back and do nothing. That means that you recognize you do have a power, and that it doesn't have to be everything against us, and there's nothing that we can do to stop it. We work together, we go inside ourselves, we go to a larger force. Call it what you want, call it your God, call it your creator, call it your essence, call it your spirit, but that's a reality too. And that's where our protection lies. That's where our defense lies. That's where our strength is. That's where our courage will come from. And that's what's going to unite us and to enable us to bring back our freedom.
Connie, God bless you. Thank you so much for what you're doing in Canada. Thanks for sharing this interview with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
Best wishes in all you do.
And you too.
Come see us in the U.S.
Well, let's make sure we just keep working and struggling.
We'll do it.
Good.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Conservative Roundtable.